The emergency beacon reached the Redemption during what should have been a quiet evening. Jake was reviewing supply manifests in his office, while Zarakith helped Kira with her language lessons in the common area. Vex was performing routine maintenance on the salvage equipment, and Voss was preparing dinner for the crew. The peaceful routine was shattered when the ship's communication system began broadcasting an automated distress signal. Jake rushed to the bridge and activated the main display. The message was in Velaryon, but the translation software quickly converted it to Galactic Standard. A refugee transport carrying over 2,000 Velaryon. Survivors had suffered critical engine failure while traveling through contested space. They were stranded in a region claimed by hegemony forces, the same military organization that had destroyed the Velaryon. Homeworld months earlier, Zarakith arrived on the bridge just as the message finished repeating. Her face went pale as she listened to the coordinates and ship identification. "The Wandering Hope," she whispered. "That ship left Velar Prime just before the final evacuation. There could be people I know aboard." Jake studied the star charts, showing the refugee ship's location. The coordinates placed them deep in territory that the hegemony considered their exclusive zone. Any ship entering that area without proper authorization would be considered hostile and attacked on sight. The space around the stranded vessel was also filled with unstable asteroid fields that had been created by recent mining operations. "This is bad," X said, examining the tactical display. "Hegemony patrol ships sweep that sector every few hours. If those refugees are still there, they won't be for long." Voss joined them on the bridge, his expression grave. "The Galactic Salvage Guild has already declared the area too dangerous for rescue operations. They're recommending that all civilian ships avoid the region entirely." Jake pulled up communication records from other human salvage crews operating in nearby sectors. One by one, he contacted them and explained the situation. The responses were all the same. The risk was too high, the potential profit too low, and the political complications too dangerous. None of them were willing to attempt a rescue mission. "What about the authorities?" Zarakith asked. "Surely the Galactic Council or the refugee. Assistance organizations will send help." Jake shook his head. "I already checked. The Council won't authorize military intervention in contested space, and the refugee organizations don't have ships capable of operating in a combat zone. Those people are on their own." The bridge fell silent as everyone considered the implications. 2,000 Velaryon refugees, including families with children like Kira, were trapped in hostile territory with no way to escape and no one willing to help them. Within hours, hegemony forces would likely discover them and either destroy their ship or capture everyone aboard for forced labor. Jake called a meeting in the common area and laid out the situation honestly. The rescue mission would require them to enter contested space without authorization, navigate through dangerous asteroid fields, and risk confrontation with hegemony military forces. The refugees had no way to pay for such a dangerous operation, so there would be no profit in it. Anyone who wanted to leave the ship before they departed would be given transportation to the nearest station and a good reference for finding other work. "The decision is yours," Jake said, looking at each crew member in turn. "I won't order anyone to risk their lives for people they don't know." Vex was the first to respond. "Vex has been in situations like this before," he said, gesturing to his missing eye. "Sometimes the most important jobs are the ones that don't pay anything." Vex volunteers for the mission. Voss nodded his agreement. "I've lived long enough to know that some things matter more than credits or safety. Those refugees deserve a chance to survive." The newer crew members, who had joined Sullivan Salvage in recent weeks, looked uncertain. Jake had hired them from various backgrounds, including a young Altarian engineer named Kess and a Corvan weapons specialist called Drac. Both had families of their own and good reasons to avoid unnecessary risks. But as they discussed the situation, something unexpected happened. Instead of finding excuses to leave, the crew members began volunteering ideas for how to make the rescue mission successful. Kess suggested modifications to their ship's shields that could help them avoid detection by hegemony sensors. Drac offered to disable the weapon systems on any patrol ships they encountered rather than destroying them, reducing the political consequences of their actions. Zarakith listened to the discussion with growing amazement. These people, who came from different species and backgrounds, were willing to risk everything for refugees they had never met. It reminded her of the stories her grandmother used to tell about the old days on Velar Prime, when communities would come together to help anyone in need, regardless of their family connections or social status. "Why?" she asked suddenly, interrupting the tactical planning. "Why are you all willing to do this? These aren't your people. You don't owe them anything." Jake looked at her with that same kind expression she remembered from their first meeting. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "Because if we don't help them, no one will. And because that's what family does for each other." "Family?" Zarakith repeated. Vex grinned with his remaining eye. "Did Zarakith think we were just business partners? This crew has been family since the day she and little Kira came aboard. Families help each other, and sometimes that means helping people who might become family too." Kira, who had been quietly listening to the adult conversation, tugged on her mother's arm. "Mama, are we going to save the people on the ship?" Zarakith knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes. "It's very dangerous, little star. We might not come back." Kira thought about this seriously, then looked around at the crew, members who had become her extended family. "But if we don't try to help them, they'll be all alone like we were before Jake found us. Right?" The simple wisdom of a child's perspective settled the matter. Jake began issuing orders for departure preparations, while Voss and Vex worked on ship modifications. Zaraketh coordinated the complex logistics of what they would need for a large-scale evacuation, using her 4 arms to manage multiple planning systems, simultaneously. As the Redemption prepared to leave Nexus Prime, other salvage crews watched their departure with curiosity and concern. Word had already spread about Sullivan Salvage's unofficial rescue mission, and opinions were divided about whether Jake and his crew were brave heroes or reckless fools. The ship's engines hummed to life as they cleared the station's docking bays and set course for contested space. Zarakith stood on the bridge beside Jake, watching the stars wheel by as they entered hyperspace. For the first time since leaving her destroyed homeworld, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere. "Thank you," she said quietly to Jake. He glanced at her with a slight smile. "Thank me after we get everyone home safely. This is just the beginning of what's going to be a very long day." As the Redemption raced through hyperspace toward an uncertain confrontation with one of the galaxy's most powerful military forces, every crew member understood that they were embarking on something larger than a simple rescue mission. They were proving that sometimes the most important battles were fought not for profit or glory, but simply because someone needed help, and no one else was willing to provide it. 3 months had passed since Zarakith and Kira joined the crew of the Redemption, and life had changed completely for both of them. Zarakith woke each morning in their small but comfortable quarters, knowing she had meaningful work ahead of her, while Kira had grown confident and happy among the diverse crew members who had become like family to her. The morning routine aboard the Redemption had become familiar and comforting. Voss would prepare breakfast in the common area, while Jake reviewed potential salvage contracts in his office. Vex would check the ship systems and make his daily reports about what needed repair or replacement. Kira would help wherever she could, carrying tools for the crew members and asking endless questions about how everything worked. Zaraketh had proven herself to be everything Jake had hoped for when he hired her. Her 4 arms allowed her to perform complex, technical tasks that would normally require multiple crew members working together. She could simultaneously monitor environmental systems, operate salvage equipment, and record detailed notes about whatever they were working on. More importantly, she had shown the kind of dedication and reliability that made Jake confident in giving her increasingly important responsibilities. Today, they were approaching what would be their most challenging salvage operation yet. A hegemony warship had been drifting near a pulsar for several weeks after suffering critical system failures during a battle with rebel forces. The ship contained valuable quantum cores and advanced weapon systems that could be sold for enough credits to keep the redemption running for months. The problem was the pulsar itself. The rotating neutron star sent out regular bursts of deadly radiation and gravitational distortions that could tear apart any ship that got too close. Most salvage crews had already declared the job impossible, but Jake had studied the pulsar's rotation pattern and believed they could work safely during the brief windows between radiation bursts. Zaraketh stood beside Jake on the bridge as they approached the drifting warship. The massive vessel looked dead in space, its hull scarred by weapon impacts and its lights completely dark. The pulsar spun in the distance like a cosmic lighthouse, sending out beams of energy that lit up the surrounding debris field in brilliant flashes. Radiation burst in 30 seconds, announced Voss from the sensor station. All crew to shielded positions. Everyone moved quickly to their assigned locations behind the ship's radiation barriers. These brief moments of safety were their only chance to work, and every second counted. Jake had calculated that they would have exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds between each burst to complete their salvage operations. Next window opening in 5 seconds, Jake called out. Zaraketh, you're on salvage coordination. Vex, engine monitoring. Voss, keep tracking that pulsar timing. As soon as the radiation cleared, Zaraketh went to work. She moved to the salvage control station and began operating 4 different systems simultaneously. Her upper right hand controlled the external manipulator arms that would cut into the warship's hull. Her upper left hand managed the environmental controls that kept their ship stable in the chaotic gravitational field. Her lower right hand operated the scanning equipment that located the most valuable components inside the damaged vessel. Her lower left hand recorded everything on multiple data systems, so they could review their progress between radiation windows. The work was incredibly complex and dangerous. The gravitational effects from the pulsar made it difficult to maintain steady contact with the warship, and the brief time windows meant that every movement had to be perfect. One mistake could result in losing valuable equipment or worse, getting caught in the open when the next radiation burst arrived. 2 minutes remaining, Voss announced as Zaraketh guided the manipulator arms deeper into the warship's interior. She had located the quantum cores in the ship's engine section, but reaching them required cutting through several layers of armored bulkheads. With her multiple arms, she was able to direct 2 different cutting tools, while simultaneously adjusting their ship's position to maintain a stable connection and monitoring the internal scanners to avoid hitting anything that might explode. Vex watched her work with obvious admiration. Vex has never seen anyone coordinate so many operations at once, he said. Most salvagers would need a full crew to attempt what she's doing alone. 1 minute warning, Voss called out. Whatever we're doing, we need to wrap it up. Zaraketh made a quick decision. Instead of trying to extract the entire quantum core assembly, she focused on removing the 3 most valuable components that could be safely detached in the remaining time. Her hands moved with practiced precision, operating tools and controls with the kind of smooth efficiency that only came from months of training and natural ability. 30 seconds, Voss announced. All equipment needs to be clear. Just as the warning came, something went wrong. The gravitational fluctuations from the pulsar suddenly intensified, causing their ship to lurch away from the warship. The manipulator. Arms were still extended and connected to the quantum core assembly, and the sudden movement threatened to tear apart both the salvage equipment and potentially damage the Redemption's hull dot without hesitation. Zaraketh took control of the situation. While Jake struggled with the main piloting controls, she used her forearms to simultaneously operate the manipulator arm controls, the ship's stabilization thrusters, the magnetic anchoring system, and the emergency disconnect protocols. Her movements were so fast and coordinated that the other crew members could barely follow what she was doing. 10 seconds. Voss shouted over the sound of straining metal and overloaded systems. Zaraketh managed to safely retract the manipulator, arms and secure the salvage components, just as the radiation burst swept over them. Everyone took shelter behind the shielding, breathing heavily from the intensity of the near disaster. "That was incredible," Jake said, once the immediate danger had passed. "I've never seen anyone react that fast or coordinate that many systems under pressure." Over the following weeks, word began to spread through the salvage community about Sullivan Salvage's improved success rate and efficiency. Other crews started asking Jake about his methods and his crew, curious about how a small operation was consistently outperforming larger and better-funded competitors. Several crew captains approached Jake with offers to buy out Zaraketh's contract, assuming that he owned her labor the way many alien species treated their workers. Jake's angry responses to these offers confused many of the aliens, who couldn't understand why he would refuse profitable deals or why he insisted that Zaraketh was a free employee who made her own decisions about her work. Meanwhile, Kira had found her own place among the crew. She spent her days learning from different crew members, picking up basic technical skills from Voss, learning Corvin mathematics from Vex, and listening to Jake's stories about Earth's history and exploration. The shy, frightened child who had arrived months ago had grown into a confident and curious little girl who brought laughter and energy to the industrial corridors of their ship. The crew had become a real family, bound together not by species or shared origins, but by mutual respect and shared purpose. Jake's simple philosophy of judging people by their actions rather than their backgrounds had created something special, and everyone aboard the Redemption knew they were part of something larger than just a salvage operation dot as they prepared for their next mission. Zaraketh reflected on how much her life had changed since that desperate day when she walked into Jake's workshop. She had found not just employment, but a place where her abilities were valued and her daughter could grow up surrounded by people who cared about her future. Zaraketh stepped through the entrance of Sullivan Salvage and immediately felt overwhelmed by the chaos inside. Ship parts hung from the ceiling on chains and cables. Workbenches covered every available surface, and holographic displays showed rotating images of damaged vessels. The smell of metal and machine oil filled the air, mixed with something that might have been coffee from Earth Dot near the center of the workspace. A human man stood hunched over a large holographic display showing the internal structure of what looked like a military vessel. He wore a faded jacket that Zaraketh recognized as old Earth military surplus, though she had never seen a human in person before. His hair was brown with streaks of gray, and his hands were stained with grease and calloused from years of manual work. Two other beings worked nearby. A Corvin with one eye missing sat at a workbench, carefully examining what appeared to be a quantum drive component with various scanning tools. His remaining eye was sharp and focused, and despite his injury, his movements were precise and confident. Near the back of the space, an elderly Altarian worked on some kind of engine part, his long fingers moving with the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades working with machinery. The human looked up from his display as Zaraketh approached. His eyes were tired but kind, the sort of expression that came from someone who had seen many difficult things but refused to let them make him cruel. He noticed Kira hiding behind her mother's cloak, and his expression softened even more. "Can I help you?" he asked in heavily accented Galactic Standard. His voice was rough, but not unfriendly. Zaraketh straightened her shoulders and tried to project confidence she didn't feel. "My name is Zaraketh, and this is my daughter Kira. I heard that you might have work available for someone with technical skills." The human studied her for a moment, taking in her 4 arms and blue-scaled skin. "You're Velaryon," he said, but without the tone of judgment she had grown used to hearing. "Yes, sir," she replied, waiting for the inevitable rejection. Instead, he gestured toward a nearby chair. "Please, sit down. I'm Jake Sullivan, and I own this operation. Tell me about your experience." Zaraketh sat carefully, keeping Kira close beside her. She had prepared this speech so many times today that the words came automatically. "I worked for 15 years in the technical maintenance division of Velaryon Central Industries. I specialized in ship systems analysis and component repair. I can work with multiple systems simultaneously due to my natural advantages, and I have experience with most common starship technologies." Jake nodded, still listening. "What happened to your job?" The question was simple, but it brought back painful memories. When the Hegemony Mining Consortium destroyed our homeworld, all the major industries collapsed. Most Velaryons scattered across the galaxy as refugees. I've been looking for work for 8 months now, but most employers. She trailed off, not wanting to sound like she was complaining. Most employers won't hire Velaryons because they think your people are unreliable, Jake finished for her. I've heard the same story from a dozen other species. Everyone's got some reason why they can't trust the refugees. Zaraketh felt her heart sink. Even this human was going to turn her away, but Jake continued talking. "Thing is, I don't much care what species someone is or where they come from. I care whether they can do the job and whether they'll stick around long enough to make training them worthwhile." "You say you can work with multiple systems at once?" She blinked in surprise. "Yes, sir. Would you like me to demonstrate?" Jake gestured toward his workbench. "Show me what you can do with those components over there." Zaraketh moved to the indicated area, where several different types of ship parts were scattered across the surface. She began sorting them by type and function with her upper 2 hands, while simultaneously operating a diagnostic scanner with her 3rd hand and taking notes on a datapad with her 4th. Her movements were smooth and practiced, the result of years of experience working in high-pressure situations. The one-eyed Corvin looked up from his own work and whistled appreciatively. "Dex hasn't seen coordination like that in years," he said, referring to himself in 3rd person, as was common among his people. "Most beings need 3 different workers to do what she just did." The elderly Altarian, whose name appeared to be Voss based on the name tag on his work clothes, nodded in agreement. "Very impressive, young lady. We could definitely use someone with your skills around here." Jake watched the demonstration with growing interest. "How long would it take you to learn our specific salvage protocols?" "We work with damaged ships, not factory-fresh components. Everything's usually half destroyed and jury-rigged to keep working." Zaraketh felt a flutter of hope in her chest. "I'm a fast learner, sir, and I've worked with emergency repairs before. During the evacuation of our homeworld, I helped keep damaged refugee ships running long enough to reach safety." "What about your daughter?" Jake asked, looking down at Kira, who was still clinging to her mother's cloak. "Most salvage work involves travel, and some of the locations we visit aren't exactly safe for children." This was the question Zaraketh had been dreading. Every potential employer who had gotten this far always ended the conversation when they learned about Kira. "I understand. If that's a problem, sir, but I have nowhere else to leave her, and she's very well behaved. She won't interfere with my work." Jake knelt down to Kira's eye level. "What's your name, little one?" Kira looked up at her mother for permission, then whispered, "Kira." "That's a pretty name," Jake said gently. "Do you like spaceships?" Kira nodded shyly and pulled out her small toy shuttle. "This one can go anywhere in the galaxy," she said, her voice getting a little stronger. "Mama says someday we'll find a place where we can stay." Jake examined the toy with serious attention. "This is a good ship. Strong design, built to last. Just like your mama, I bet." He stood up and looked back at Zarakith. "Here's the situation. I need someone with your skills, and I don't care about your species or your situation. The work is sometimes dangerous, but no one on my crew goes anywhere they don't want to go. The pay is fair, and I provide quarters for crew members and their families aboard my ship." Zarakith couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You mean we could live here? On your ship?" "The redemption isn't fancy, but she's got good bones and plenty of space. Kira would have other crew members to talk to, and Voss here makes excellent meals. Kid needs proper food, not station rations." Dex looked up from his work again. "Little ones bring good luck to salvage operations. Vex has seen it many times." Zarakith felt tears forming in her eyes. After months of rejection and desperation, this human stranger was offering her not just a job, but a home for both her and her daughter. "When would you want me to start?" Jake smiled for the first time since she had arrived. "How about right now? Voss can show you to your quarters, and tomorrow we'll start teaching you our systems. We've got a salvage job lined up for next week, and I could use someone with steady hands and a good eye for detail." As Voss led them toward the back of the workspace where a corridor connected to the docked ship, Kira tugged on her mother's arm. "Mama, are we going to stay here?" Zarakith looked back at Jake, who was already returning to his holographic displays, and at Vex, who gave her an encouraging nod. For the first time in months, she felt like they might actually have found a place where they belonged. "Yes, little star," she whispered to her daughter. "I think we're finally home." Zarakith pulled her worn cloak tighter around her shoulders as she walked through the busy marketplace of Nexus Prime. Her 6-year-old daughter Kira held onto her lower left arm with tiny fingers that never seemed to let go anymore. The trade station buzzed with activity as hundreds of different alien species moved between shops and stalls, but none of them looked at the blue-scaled Velarian mother with anything but disgust or pity, and morning had started with hope. Zarakith had checked the employment boards in the central hub, noting down addresses of businesses that claimed to need workers. Her people were known across the galaxy for their ability to multitask with their 4 arms, and she had always been good with technical work back on her homeworld. Surely someone would need her skills. The first shop belonged to a Zentarian merchant who sold electronic components. His crystalline body sparkled under the artificial lights as he looked up from his inventory. Zarakith approached the counter with her most professional smile and explained that she was looking for work. She demonstrated how she could sort components with 2 hands, while operating a scanner with her 3rd hand and taking notes with her 4th. The Zentarian's expression turned cold. "We don't hire Velarians," he said without any emotion. "Your people are known for abandoning jobs when things get difficult." Zarakith felt her heart sink, but kept her voice steady. "Sir, I have experience with electronics, and am willing to work hard. I have references from my previous job on Velar Prime. Before your world got itself destroyed by poor financial decisions," the merchant interrupted. "The answer is no." Kira tugged on her mother's arm as they left the shop. "Mama, why was he so mean to us?" Zarakith knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes. "Some people judge us before they know us, little star. but we'll find someone who sees how special you are. The second shop sold food supplies to ship crews. The owner was a large, gas-based ethereal who floated behind the counter in a containment suit. Zaraketh explained her situation again, mentioning that she could handle multiple tasks at once and had experience managing inventory systems. Ethereal simply floated away without saying a word, disappearing into the back room. His assistant, a nervous-looking Altarian, shook his head apologetically. "We're not hiring right now," he whispered, though Zaraketh could see a help-wanted sign flickering on the wall display. Shop after shop gave her the same treatment. Kepler Merchant told her they didn't have positions suitable for someone with family complications. A Corvin trader said his business couldn't afford to train someone who might leave suddenly. A group of hegemony officials running a shipping office laughed when she mentioned her technical skills, saying Velarians were only good for manual labor, and even then, only when properly supervised. By midday, Zaraketh's hope was fading fast. She sat on a bench in the station's main plaza while Kira played with a small toy shuttle that had been her favorite since they left their destroyed homeworld. The little girl made soft whooshing sounds as she flew the toy through the air, pretending it was exploring new worlds where they could find a home. Zaraketh watched other families walking by, Centaurian parents with their crystal children that sparkled like jewels, Altarian families with their tall, elegant forms moving gracefully through the crowds, Corvin parents teaching their cubs how to negotiate with merchants. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere except them. "I'm hungry, Mama," Kira said softly, returning to her mother's side. Zaraketh checked her small pouch of credits. They had enough for one more meal, maybe two if they bought the cheapest ration packs. After that, she didn't know what they would do. The station authorities only allowed visitors to stay for 7 days without proper employment or residence permits. They had been here for 5 days already. "Let's get something to eat," she said, forcing a smile for her daughter's sake. They found a small food stall run by an elderly Altarian who served simple meals. Zaraketh ordered the cheapest option and watched as Kira ate slowly, savoring every bite. The little girl had learned not to waste food during their long journey as refugees, and it broke her mother's heart to see such wisdom in someone so young. While Kira ate, Zaraketh overheard a conversation at the next table. Two Zentaurian traders were discussing business deals and complaining about various competitors. "That crazy human down in the lower sectors is stealing contracts again," one of them said, his crystal form flickering with annoyance. "Sullivan salvage, they call it. The man has no sense of proper business practices." "I heard he hires anyone desperate enough to work for him," the other replied. "Outcasts, criminals, refugees. No wonder his operation is so chaotic. The Galactic Trade Commission should shut him down. Humans have no understanding of how civilized business should be conducted." Zaraketh listened carefully, memorizing every word. A human who hired desperate people sounded like exactly what she needed. She had heard that humans were strange compared to other species, known for making decisions based on emotion, rather than logic. Maybe that strangeness would work in her favor. After Kira finished eating, they made their way to the lower sectors of the station. The corridors here were darker and less maintained than the upper levels where the wealthy merchants conducted their business. The air smelled of engine oil and recycled atmosphere, and the sounds of machinery echoed off the metal walls. Many of the businesses in this area catered to ship crews and independent traders, repair shops, parts dealers, and small-time cargo. Handlers occupied converted storage bays and maintenance areas. It was the kind of place where people came when they couldn't afford the premium services in the upper levels. Zaraketh asked several people about Sullivan salvage, and eventually, a Corvin mechanic pointed her toward a section that specialized in ship salvage and recovery operations. "Look for the human with the old Earth military jacket," he said. "Can't miss him. He's usually covered in grease and arguing with someone about safety regulations." As they walked deeper into the industrial section, Kira stayed close to her mother's side. The lighting was dimmer here, and strange sounds came from behind closed doors. But Zarakith felt a spark of hope for the first time all day. If this human really did hire desperate people, maybe he would give her a chance. They passed several salvage operations, but most were run by familiar alien species who barely looked up as they walked by. Finally, they found a converted cargo bay with a hand-painted sign that read, "Sullivan Salvage and Recovery. No job too dangerous." Through the open doors, Zarakith could see a cluttered workspace filled with salvaged ship components, holographic displays showing technical schematics, and tools scattered across multiple workbenches. The sound of welding equipment came from somewhere in the back, and she could hear voices discussing engine modifications. This was it. Her last chance to find work and keep herself and Kira from being thrown off the station. She took a deep breath, adjusted her cloak, and walked toward the entrance with her daughter's small hand firmly grasped in her lower right arm. Whatever happened next would determine whether they had a future or would join the countless other refugees drifting through space with nowhere to call home. The jump to Lyrian space took 6 hours, with the volunteer fleet arriving in 3 separate groups as planned. Jake watched his sensors as the Star Runner dropped out of hyperspace near the outer edge of the Kepler 442 system. What he saw made his stomach clench with anger and determination. The beautiful blue world that Zara called home was surrounded by hegemony vessels. Massive cargo ships hung in orbit like metal vultures, loading their holds with stolen resources and enslaved people. Military escorts patrolled the shipping lanes, their weapons trained on the planet below. Jake counted at least 60 enemy ships, 10 times the size of their volunteer fleet. Zara stood beside him on the bridge, her face pale as she looked at her conquered world. The orbital cities she remembered from childhood were dark and broken. The space stations where her people had studied the stars were now hegemony processing centers. Everything she had loved was gone, replaced by the machinery of slavery and exploitation. Captain Sullivan's voice crackled over the communication system as his military group engaged the hegemony patrol ships. The diversion was working, drawing enemy attention away from the planet and giving Jake's rescue group a chance to reach the surface undetected. Jake piloted the Star Runner through the upper atmosphere, following Zara's directions toward the mountain regions where Lyrian survivors were hiding. Behind him, 12 other ships carried volunteer rescue teams armed with medical supplies and portable shelters. They had maybe 3 hours before hegemony. Reinforcements would arrive to investigate the orbital battle. The first refugee camp was hidden in a valley between 2 snow-capped peaks. As Jake landed the Star Runner, dozens of Lyrians emerged from concealed shelters, their blue skin pale with malnutrition and their large eyes filled with desperate hope. They looked exactly like Zara, delicate and graceful despite their suffering. The rescue teams worked with practiced efficiency, loading evacuees aboard the ships and providing emergency medical care to those who needed it. Dr. Chun moved between patients, her portable equipment treating injuries and illnesses that had gone untreated for months. The Lyrians were weak but cooperative, understanding that their salvation had finally arrived. Zara served as translator and coordinator, helping the rescue teams communicate with the survivors and identifying those who needed immediate medical attention. Jake watched her work and realized how much strength was hidden beneath her fragile appearance. She had endured months of horror and despair, but seeing her people being rescued was giving her new energy. The second and third camps yielded more survivors, families that had hidden in caves and abandoned buildings while hegemony forces searched for them. Each group brought new stories of loss and suffering, but also of hope that someone would eventually come to help them. Many had heard rumors about the species called humans, stories passed between prisoners about the strange aliens, who fought impossible battles to save strangers. As Jake's ships filled with evacuees, the orbital battle intensified. Captain Sullivan reported that his diversion was drawing more hegemony vessels away from the planet, but his small force was taking heavy damage. The mining ship Deep Digger had lost its main engines, and the research vessel Star Search was limping back toward the jump point with hull breaches on 3 decks. Then something unexpected happened. Long-range sensors detected new ships entering the system, but they were not hegemony reinforcements. A mixed fleet of alien vessels was approaching the battle zone, their communication channels broadcasting messages of support for the human rescue mission. Captain Vex of the Centaurian Trade Guild led a squadron of armed merchant ships, the Andromedan. Science Collective had sent their fastest vessels. Even the normally isolationist Rigel Empire had contributed 3 heavy cruisers to the growing alliance. Species that had remained neutral for decades were suddenly joining the fight. Jake listened to the radio traffic as alien captains coordinated with Sullivan's human forces. For the first time in galactic history, a truly multi-species coalition was forming in real time, united by their admiration for human courage and their desire to strike back against hegemony oppression. The tide of battle began to turn as more alien ships arrived. The hegemony commanders, faced with an expanding coalition they had never anticipated, found their tactical advantages neutralized by sheer numbers and unexpected cooperation between species that normally competed with each other. Captain Lisa Park's voice came over the communication system, filled with excitement and disbelief. "Jake," she said, "you need to hear this. I just intercepted a transmission from the hegemony fleet commander. He is requesting permission to withdraw from the system. They are actually retreating." Jake could hardly believe what he was hearing. The hegemony had never retreated from a conquered world before, but they were facing something they had not planned for. The human willingness to sacrifice everything for strangers had inspired other species to find their own courage, creating a coalition that was more powerful than the sum of its parts. On the planet's surface, the final evacuation runs were proceeding smoothly. Jake's ships had rescued over 3,000 Lyrian survivors, more than anyone had dared to hope for. The hidden camps had yielded families, elderly scholars, and children who carried the future of their species in their hearts and minds. As the Star Runner lifted off from the last refugee site, Jake felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. They had done the impossible, not just surviving their confrontation with the hegemony, but actually winning. More importantly, they had proven that cooperation between species was possible when people focused on doing what was right instead of what was profitable. Zara stood beside him as they climbed toward orbit, tears streaming down her face as she watched her world fall away below them. But these were not tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of gratitude and amazement at what had been accomplished. The volunteer fleet regrouped at the edge of the system, their ships filled with rescued Lyrians and their crews buzzing with excitement over their impossible victory. The alien coalition ships formed a protective escort, ensuring that the evacuees would reach safety without interference. During the journey to a neutral system where the Lyrians could establish a new colony, Jake finally had time to reflect on everything that had happened. It had started with a young alien girl trying to steal his ship, and ended with the largest interstellar rescue mission in recorded history. But the most amazing part was Zara's original excuse for breaking into his navigation system. She had been so certain of human nature that she had risked everything on the belief that strangers would help her, simply because it was the right thing to do. Her faith had not only been justified, it had inspired a galactic transformation. New Colony World was a green planet with vast forests and clean rivers, perfect for the surviving Lyrians to rebuild their civilization. As Jake watched the evacuees take their first steps on free soil, he realized that something fundamental had changed in the galaxy. The coalition that had formed to rescue the Lyrians did not dissolve after the mission ended. Instead, it grew. Stronger, with more species joining every day. They called it the Alliance for Mutual Protection, and its founding principle was simple. When any member species was threatened, the others would come to help, regardless of the cost or risk involved. Jake found Zara standing at the edge of the new colony's first settlement, watching Lyrian children play in the afternoon sunlight. She looked peaceful for the first time since he had met her. The weight of desperation finally lifted from her shoulders. She turned to him and spoke in careful Galactic Standard, her pronunciation much improved after weeks of practice. "You asked me once why I tried to steal your ship," she said. "I told you it was because I believed humans would help us." But that was not the complete truth. Jake waited for her to continue, curious about what she had not told him before. Zara smiled, her blue eyes bright with contentment. "I did not try to steal your ship," she said. "I was trying to find my way home, and thanks to you, I did. Home is not just a place where your people live. It is a place where people care about each other, where strangers become family, where hope is stronger than fear. You showed me that humans carry home with them wherever they go." For the first time since their adventure began, Jake Morrison was truly speechless.